Good morning, everybody. I would like to welcome the Reverend Dr. George Hargreaves as the witness who will be giving his testimony today before the CDAC panel, the Commission of Inquiry into Discrimination Against Christians. Thank you, everybody, for making the time to be with us. I'm Robert Harris. I will be chairing today's hearing, and I would like to introduce my fellow commissioners, Will Jones, Peter Williams, Ian Shelley, and Tony Rushinsky. The purpose of these hearings is to gather evidence from those who say they have faced discrimination, injustice, or hostility on account of their Christian faith. The Commission is ultimately tasked with investigating the nature, context, and scale of discrimination faced by Christians. Now, when the evidence is collected and analysed at the end of the inquiry's work, which is anticipated be about no more than 2 years, a final report will be provided for the attention of Parliament. At the beginning of these sessions, it is our practice to ask the witness to give a summary of what happened to them. So, George, if I may begin by asking you to give us a summary, and if possible, I realise it's going to be difficult, there's a lot to talk about, but if you can contain your summary within about approximately 10 minutes, and following that, the members of the panel will certainly have a lot of questions for you. So over to you, George. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a privilege to be able to speak to the CDAC Commission. My story starts in 2018 when I joined a charity by the name of Evolve Housing Plus Support, which gave housing to young people, young and old, in fact, in the Greater London area, homeless people. And I worked as a night concierge at their Beacon House facility in South Kensington. I just returned from missionary work in Uganda and wanted to put my hand to the plow with something since I was no longer pastoring a church. And I saw this opportunity and it fitted me. It was a night job which allowed me to still do meetings and things during the day, and I'm a bit of a nocturnal person anyway. It was in January 2019 that one of my co-workers, a daytime support worker, on the handover in the evening, asked me a question. I thought it was an innocent question. In fact, the co-worker and I, we got on well as far as I was concerned. This was a female of African origin, and as far as I knew, there was no problem between us. She asked me the question, is lesbianism in the Bible? I said, oh, yeah, it's there. I just have to look at Romans chapter 1. The conversation continued, and then she said, well, but gay people are born like that, aren't they? And I retorted, as I've often done in this kind of debate, it's an old chestnut, as it were. I said, well, paedophiles say they're born the same way, and they just make the same argument. There wasn't a huge reaction to that statement. I said, but even if you are born that way, if you look at John chapter 9, you'll see a case where Jesus healed somebody born with a condition. So I believe that Jesus is able to heal, even if you do want to go that way and say you're born like that. Jesus can heal that which you're born with that needs to be healed. The conversation went on, and I can't remember all the details, but I started to realize that I had been sucked into a trap when the questions moved on to dinosaurs. And at that point, I thought, let me make a cup of coffee and get ready for my shift. And the kind of penny dropped that actually this was not a friendly conversation. And one of the things that did come up in that conversation that took me aback was the colleague said, "Oh, you're one of those black men who like white women." I thought, where's that coming from? Um, well, she had mentioned, what if your son was gay? So she clearly knew that I had a son, and his mother was white. Um, and so it started to become a bit murky, and I cut off the conversation, started making a cup of coffee, and she left, um, and went on her way. But thereafter, her whole attitude to me changed. She wouldn't talk to me. None of that fellowship, ease of fellowship that we had prior to that time. Um, we have a saying back in the day, sending someone to Coventry. That's how it felt. No disrespect to anybody living in Coventry, but it dates back to a time when people, basically, you're shunned. And I thought that this was unacceptable, and I actually reported it to my manager, um, saying that this is not acceptable, what has happened here, comments that have been made which I think are racist, and the way this behavior has also turned. And it's actually a good job that I did that, because unbeknownst to me, uh, the colleague had made a complaint about me. So, and the comments and discussion I had about homosexuality and lesbianism and so forth. So there ensued an investigation into both of us, a complaint from one, a complaint from the other. This investigation was carried out by an area manager. And on the face of it, it seemed like he was going to be doing a fair job. We had preliminary meetings. Uh, in these kind of instances, one is able to bring a colleague along with you. There were colleagues on my shift who had witnessed the behavior of this support worker, and that area manager, who was the investigating officer, had promised to speak with witnesses to this lady's behavior. In fact, he promised to do that the very next day. And one of those people, one of those witnesses, was with me in that meeting. So we thought, okay, if you're going to investigate this properly, we're going to get down to the truth of the matter. As it turns out, he never did. But what did happen is that when I had my formal interview, there on the desk was a Bible, were newspaper cuttings, were the Scottish Christian Party manifesto, dating back, I think, 10 years. And suddenly I was now being questioned about my past activism as a Christian, the things in the manifesto of the Christian Party, reports. And I said to the HR manager that was there, you better stop this. This is wrong. This has got nothing to do with what the matter in hand. This is wrong. The guy continued going on, and so I had to press my case even further. I said, this needs to stop now. This is wrong. And the HR manager told him to stop, and the the meeting went on into a more appropriate way. So we had the meeting. I was sent the minutes of the meeting to sign off on those, and conspicuous by its absence was any reference to what had happened with all the Bible quotations and the Christian Party manifesto, and none of that was in the document that they asked me to sign off. I said, I'm not signing this off because this is not a true representation of what happened. I was harassed in that meeting. There should have been no mention of what I'd been doing 10, 15 years ago. It was totally inappropriate. They made their judgment. They found us both not guilty, as it were, of any wrongdoing. They didn't see that the the worker had done anything inappropriate, and they had to. Uh, I could sense in the writing that grudgingly they had to admit that I hadn't done anything wrong, particularly since I'd been asked a question and gave an answer. I was unhappy with that judgment, and told them so, and told them that actually I had been racially abused and religiously discriminated against, and you need to do something about that, or else I'm going to make a formal complaint to the employment tribunal, which is what I did. Um, I went to ACAS, and then we went to the ET. I was unable to get any of the bigger agencies, and this is no criticism to them. They do great work. Christian agencies that get involved in these kind of matters. I'm very grateful, however, to the advice that was non-legal, but just as a friend that I got from one of the institutions that do these things, which was very, very helpful. The main piece of advice he suggested I get, was ask for a subject access request, something I'd never heard of. And I did that, and I received a huge box of everything relating to me. And what I found in that box, which was shocking, was that there had been discussions, there had been meetings about me before this incident took place. The manager at Beacon House, where I worked, had been interviewing people about me. Apparently, uh, things had been found online. My history with the Christian Party, my Oxford Union speech, and so forth, had been found by somebody and had become a discussion, not just of a matter of discussion amongst colleagues, but a formal meeting was actually held to discuss what to do about George. I was totally unaware of this. And it was after that meeting that this question was raised by my colleague. So what it was clear to me, and I hadn't put in my complaint to ACAS at that point, but this really tipped the balance, that there had been a witch hunt already started, and I was totally set up. So so I put forward the the case, and we went to the tribunal. We went this almost 5 years ago to the date. It's February 2020. And when I got the witness statement of the investigating officer, the area manager, several things jumped out at me. One, the witness statement, which I now learned was done aided by the solicitors themselves, stated that the area manager was a gay man. Now, I had not even considered that. I hadn't bought. I didn't know the guy as an area manager. He was not my close colleague, but for some reason they wanted to let that be known in the witness statement that he was a gay man. Okay, but the other thing that was shocking and unbelievable was that he'd admitted that he had taken advice from Stonewall, and had also taken advice from the equalities, the information commissioner. Sorry, he taken the commissioner, the information commissioner, as to whether he could search my online presence. Now, this gentleman, along with my work colleague, were both found by the employment tribunal to have harassed me for my religious beliefs. In fact, the first judgment that came out in June, it's actually was written up in May 18th, actually had uh, religious discrimination as far as the area manager was concerned. But it turned out on a legal technicality, you cannot have harassment and religious discrimination found on the same facts. So once he was found to have harassed me on the facts that were given, he could not be found to have discriminated me on the same facts. So actually, had I not gone in for harassment and just gone for discrimination, this gentleman would have been found to have discriminated me against me because of my religious beliefs. The colleague, the work colleague, was found to have discriminated against me, both racially and for religious purposes. So the judgment was made. I think that she was found to have harassed me, but racially discriminated me. But it's not there as a matter of record. So after the case had been won, in my view, they take a different view. They would say there were 7 points that they won, and I only won on 3, which for them is an important point, but I think is an important point for others who are litigants in person, because I'm not a lawyer. And the takeaway from that is when you go for these cases, don't throw everything in. Because if you lose on any of the other ones, they will say, oh, we won on 5 or 6 or 7, as they say, and you only won 3. We actually won on the important matters: racial discrimination, religious harassment, and a complete abuse of power. But the interesting thing was that when I shared this, my case, with a barrister friend of mine, a Christian barrister friend of mine, he immediately said to me, George, this guy would never have gotten permission from the ICO, the Information Commissioner's Office, to look into your background. And I was like, what? So I'll send you a case they recently took out against, I think, a trade union or something like that. They would never have had, or a trade union taken out against somebody or the other. So they would never have done that. They just never. So I took that up and I inquired with the ICO, and they confirmed, no, they would not do that. It's not their business to do. So the long and the short of it, this person was not telling the truth when he said the ICO gave him permission. And I think I've laid those documents before the commission. So here, in a nutshell, to wrap up, we have a gross case of abuse of power. A gay man had been given the job of investigating a Christian minister, and they knew I was a Christian minister, for answering a question about the Bible. Is lesbianism in the Bible, was the question. Quite appropriate for a minister to deal with that. He decides that he's going to rake up everything that he can find about me and my Christian activism, claims that he has got permission from the ICO, and admits, even under oath and questioning, that he met with Stonewall to take advice as to how to deal with me, and uses his position of power to abuse me. This is why I'm here today. In the scheme of things, this is light affliction when you compare what's happening in Syria or in Pakistan or around the world. But this is Britain that we're talking about. I've stood up not for myself, but for others who maybe are not well trained as I, maybe not as articulate as I maybe have not got the strength to go to and defend themselves in the ET. It needs to be known that there are some in positions of power in companies who will abuse that power and abuse Christians because of their faith. This is what happened to me, and this is why I'm here today. And I invite the Commission to ask me further questions.
Thank you very much, George, for that summary. I would like to start by asking some questions. You referred in passing to the meeting you had with the area manager when he was investigating what happened with your fellow support worker. And you said that on the desk in the office, there was a Bible, press cuttings relating to your past work with the Scottish Christian Party. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Also a copy of the manifesto. So I have a few questions relating to that. What questions were there, if any, about the Bible or your views about particular parts of the Bible? What came up in that conversation?
Well, as I said, I shut down the conversation very quickly. But I had pointed in my discussions with my co-worker to John chapter 9. And you'll remember that in John chapter 9, there's a man born blind. And so I think there may well have been a question around that. And this is 5 years ago. I can't remember because I was so taken aback that all this paraphernalia was there that I just don't think so. This is wrong, you know. Uh, this I'm not. If we're going to have a discussion about the Bible, I can have one, as I proved with the thing. But this was just totally inappropriate, so I closed it down very, very quickly.
I see. With regards to the Scottish Christian Party manifesto, can you just tell us what was your link, your role at the time to that party?
I was the founder. I was the founder, and I wrote the manifesto along with another colleague.
Right. And what kind of questions did they have? Did that feature in the conversation about the manifesto itself?
The trajectory of his conversation was about our position on homosexuality, which was clear in our manifesto. And he had certain things about Stonewall had come against us, and press cuttings about Stonewall had come against us, and so on. But to get the mood of the meeting, I immediately red flagged this as what has this got to do with what happened in our office a few months ago? And I told the HR person, this is totally inappropriate. I'm not here to be quizzed about the Scottish Christian Party. And the judge found in my favour.
Present at that meeting, right?
Sorry?
In terms of the people present, was it just yourself at that meeting, the area manager and the HR person?
Yes.
Were they the only people present? Okay.
Yeah.
You mentioned that the area manager took advice from Stonewall. Are you able to tell us, if you are aware, what that advice was exactly and how he got that advice? Because in one point you said he met with them, and another point you just said he consulted them. What was the nature of that relationship, and what did he get from them exactly?
Well, in his witness statement, he, I don't have his statement in front of me, but he indicated that he got the go-ahead from Stonewall and from the ICO. He put that forward as some kind of justification for what he did. He'd taken advice. And when I cross-examined him, he said he had a friend at Stonewall, and they went out for coffee and so forth to discuss an internal matter of my employment with somebody at Stonewall. I don't know how appropriate that is, but I think it's highly inappropriate. But he testified to that on the witness stand. Um, so this was without, there's no doubt that he spoke to somebody. I didn't get a name, but he spoke to somebody at Stonewall about my case. And he reflected that in his witness statement.
Did the judge offer any comments about that particular revelation?
No, the judge was very sympathetic to the area manager. He made the point that this was a harassment that was not on purpose. And I put it to you, if you do something to me not on purpose, maybe you bump into me not on purpose, you spill coffee on me not on purpose, what is the first thing you'd do? I know you're asking me questions, so I'll answer the question. You'd apologize. Sorry, George, didn't mean to do that. That has never happened. That has never happened.
Right.
More,
Now, please continue.
yeah, but but interestingly enough, the judge also recognized that the investigating manager let his personal views color his behavior. That's a finding of the ET. So here's a guy who a gay guy who has now allowed his personal views to trigger his actions of harassment towards me. We need to be defended against that. That should not be able to happen. And I
Yeah.
question the wisdom, although the point was made that obviously you cannot discriminate against a gay person in terms of investigating a Christian or so on. But I wonder, out of all the people, 265 people that they employ, I don't know how many managers they happen to pick a gay man who has a friend at Stonewall to actually do my investigation.
Yes. Can I ask you, we looked at the documentation you sent us, and you say that you believe that the area manager was biased. I think you've already said that in this testimony so far. That he questioned two other employees about you. He said that they raised concerns about you. Now, can you tell us, in terms of what you know, what were those concerns?
Well, they were about my pro-life stance, and I'd actually contacted one of those. So again, this came out in the subject access request. It was ironic that he made those inquiries, but didn't actually speak to the witnesses that I'd asked him to speak to, who saw the harassment. So this just seemed like a fishing expedition. And when I spoke to my colleague who had basically just said, "Oh, we had discussions about pro-life matters, and we didn't agree on that." She was horrified to hear that actually was presented as some kind of thing against me. We were just having a conversation, and I found hundreds of people that disagree with me on my pro-life stance. I could have that conversation every day. It doesn't mean we are loggerheads or we hate each other or we're going to complain about each other. And here is the point, Robert. Christians must be able in the workplace to engage in conversation around their faith. If somebody engages with them around their faith, if somebody asks you, what do you believe about abortion? We shouldn't have to hide in our cave or retreat from it. We should be able to freely express ourselves. This is important. It's important to me as a minister, but it's important to Mrs. Smith, who is the dinner lady in a canteen. we must be able to do this without fear.
Can you tell me, George, as well? I learned from the material that you sent to us that the topics of gay marriage and adoption were discussed with, I believe, the area manager. And I don't know whether he discovered your views about these issues from his online searches or whether it came up naturally in the context of the
Oh,
conversation you had with him. Can you just elaborate on that, please?
yes, 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 yes. Well, I had done, and it's again online, I had done Oxford Union, um, an Oxford Union debate about gay adoption, and he brought that up. Um, and if you had a look at that debate, you would have seen that I was speaking about love. In fact, I invited the Pink News to write the headline that Reverend George Hargreaves loves the gay guy that I was debating against, and we put it in the full context of love and God's um, purposes for marriage and for family and so forth. And yes, that was brought up in that meeting, and it was brought up um, in the context of my Oxford Union speech.
I see. And I think it was the area manager discussing with his colleagues, correct me if I'm wrong, when they were assessing you as an employee and the views that you were expressing, they were considering this, I suppose we could call it the hypothetical gay customer who would be in receipt of services that the organization provided, and that if this customer had done an online search about yourself, they wouldn't be very happy. So the rationale went. How did this hypothesizing come up? I mean, did they bring it up to you directly, or did you find out about this through your subject access request?
This was through the subject access request, this meeting that they had, which involved my line manager, it involved when I say the manager of the facility that I worked at, my line manager, HR. This was a big meeting that they had. Uh, what about George? What if a customer? And I think I addressed this at one point because we had a customer in the facility who was openly gay. Um, and I actually, this question did come up in that fateful interview. And I made the point that actually I'd expressed my uh, pleasure isn't quite the right word, but the fact that when this uh, lesbian customer, as they call them, of Beacon House, had her girlfriend, she was far easier to manage than at other times. So it was a calming effect that we all welcomed. Interestingly enough, that same gay customer had to be ejected from the facility for threatening to stab one of my co-workers at a later date. But I had made the point that, ask anybody, we're actually pleased that she had somebody that would keep her calm, and there was never any issue about me.
Yes. I think this was in reference to some questions that were put to you by the area manager. You had expressed some confidence in the idea that you would keep your religious views, you would keep a neutral appearance. How can I put this? You wouldn't express your religious views in front of customers, and you would keep yourself neutral. Can you just give us some insight into the context in which that conversation happened?
Well, as you've said, they were raising this idea that, oh, my views would upset their customers and so forth. And I point out, number one, I'm not there to have to proselytize, to have such conversations with customers. I said I would respond to anybody who asked me anything, but I would not be proselytizing, and I never had. There was no track record of that. To give you a context, I was working in the dead of night. I hardly had conversations with the customers anyway, only those who couldn't sleep. Um, and and some of those conversations were very useful to them because they had problems, and they found a listening ear. Those conversations were always in the presence of another co-worker. Um, and indeed, at that job, I hadn't entered into that space as Reverend Dr. Hargreaves. I just entered into that space as George. And um, and people just didn't, apart from the fact that they Googled me, they didn't actually know who I was. I was at that time, however, still doing Sunday Morning Live, a BBC TV show where was a commentator for 10 years. And so um, part of my contract is that whenever I did a media thing, I'd needed to let the management know that I would be doing media and it would not be anything to do with the work that they're doing. So, so I think that would have bubbled up within the management and maybe got some curiosity going. But for the customers, I was just George, the night concierge.
Yes, thank you very much, George. Now, I have a lot more other questions, but I'm going to pause those for the moment because there needs to be ample opportunity for everyone else on the panel to ask their questions. So can I begin by asking Will Jones, would you like to put your questions forward to George? Thank you.
Hi, George. Thanks for joining us this morning. You said that you weren't able to get any help from any Christian organisations, although you got some very useful informal assistance. Can you just say a little more why you weren't able to get that help from them?
Well, I think they'd really need to answer that question. I know, unless you ask me to, I don't want to name names, but they are great organisations that do great work and probably have loads of people knocking on their door and say, "I've been discriminated against. Can you help me?" So they can't help everybody. Um, uh, my friend at one of them was concerned about the statement that I made about paedophiles. Also say they're born like that. And he had suggested that I would actually step back from that. And I said, actually, I'm not going to step back from that because there is literature out there. There's actually a gay psychologist, psychiatrist in Canada by the name of Dr. James Cantor, who his whole thesis is based on that. And Dr. Cantor was willing to come and testify on my behalf, but the other side were able to get that stopped by the judge. So this was something that was, to me, not outrageous. Not that I actually believe that either of them are born that way, but that's a whole different debate. But it was not something I was ashamed of, not something that I felt was scandalous, because it's something that was being debated and discussed. And if you go online and look at Dr. Cantor's website, he is fully convinced that they are. I have to tell you, I'm not, but it's an argument that is made. So that was but I wouldn't say that that was the reason they didn't take up the case. I think they have a lot of load to carry. It's expensive for them because they are using lawyers. And I was very grateful for the help that I got from that quarter. I would not have been able to go forward. I would not have seen the subject access request because I never knew that such a thing existed. I would have not have gotten all the background information that I got, which was very, very powerful, if not for that. So I have nothing but praise for the work that they do. But in my case, they couldn't help. And perhaps they're justified because I won the case anyway on my own and freed up resources for elsewhere.
Thank you. Did you try multiple organisations? I'm certainly not asking you to name them. I appreciate that. I'm just wondering if you asked multiple organisations.
I asked two that I knew, and I knew them. I know them very well. I asked them both, and they said no, they couldn't help us, and that's okay. That's okay. Maybe that's what the Lord wanted, and I do think if I had my way, I'd have a whole training program for Christian litigants in person, so that many more could stand up as I have stood up, because that would make a real difference. Instead of having maybe 2 or 3 cases a year, there would be a whole slew of them, which would get the message through: do not harass Christians or discriminate, because they are equipped and trained to deal with it. But that's a whole nother conversation.
Thank you. So you said that your colleague you feel that she had questioned you, or clearly chronologically she questioned you following this meeting that you later discovered via the subject access request had occurred, which you described as a part of the witch hunt. Are you aware of what connection your colleague, this particular colleague, might have had to that meeting or the people at that meeting? Do you think that do you have any reason to think that she would have been aware of that meeting, or would have heard feedback from it? Was she in any way involved in that prior process, which you later discovered had been going on?
Absolutely. In terms of the documentation tells us that colleagues were asked. So the manager of the facility was asking questions of this person, this colleague, and other people about me. And apparently they had concerns. And therefore, these concerns were kind of pushed up the line to this meeting. So, yeah, certainly.
So we say they had concerns. Who do you mean?
Colleagues who had found my online presence had concerns about the person they'd found online working with them. There's not concerns about anything I'd done to them as a colleague. Their concerns arose out of going online, finding out this is Reverend George Hargreaves, founder of the Christian Party, a man who's spoken at the Oxford Union, etc., etc. With those concerns, there's discussions with the manager, who then has discussions with HR and others. To what end, I'm not quite sure what they thought they were going to be able to do, apart from, then there's this whole thing where I've really been entrapped. Whether they sent that colleague to ask those questions, I have no evidence that I can put on that, but I do see a link between the two.
And is there any indication, I don't suppose you would know this, but then indication that colleagues were communicating with one another privately on social media, say via WhatsApp or another way, about this?
I have no idea. This is a question of the day team. People work through the day, and we have a handover of half an hour between 7 and 7:30, where you get the notes on what's happened during the day, what to watch out for during the night, and off they go. The only time that we have further engagement is when there are team meetings or team outings. And at the Christmas party, just a week before, I and that other colleague, we were on the same team in one of the games that were being played, and to me there was no indication of what was going to happen within the next month. It came out, it was like I was totally at ease with that person. We had good fun at the Christmas party, and wow, where's this coming from?
Had you had conversations on controversial topics, or what they would deem controversial topics, previously during your employment with them?
Not with any of the staff. I had controversial comments on the television because that's why they had me on the Sunday Morning Live to push back the Christian perspective on controversial matters. So they could easily have got wind that I'm on the telly and see me on the telly and hear my views. But I was not quite an undercover Christian, but I was not wearing my faith on my sleeve in that job. I was, it's me and another guy, or sometimes a woman, sitting up all night, making sure that the place doesn't burn down, the young people don't get into trouble and so forth. And at 7:30 we go home.
Thank you. And you were in, sorry, last question for now, then I'll give someone else an opportunity. So you were in, there was a hearing last week, is that correct?
Yes, that was very interesting, because a week after the remedy hearing of the first case, where I was awarded some £5,000 plus interest, I was suspended and then later sacked from the job. They were found last week to have not unfairly dismissed me or victimized me. The case there was interesting, and probably for another time. But what was interesting, and why I went through with that case, is that I needed answers. I wanted to ask those involved a simple question, which I did get to ask. Why had you not apologized for racial abuse and religious harassment that they have found? And I spoke to the former head of HR. She said, I don't know. I spoke to the former chair of the board. I don't know. Now, I would have thought that would have been a perfect opportunity to say, oh, we apologize now. But they were totally unapologetic. Moreover, and the witness stand was the man who sacked me, who I later met on the streets of Wimbledon, and he called me a bigot. And so this is amazing. So in the tribunal last week, I asked him, do you think I'm a bigot? You are a bigot, was his answer. And then he was going to say, and you're a bigot because, and the judge just had to stop him because he was about to go into a whole tirade as to why I was a bigot. This was the guy who sat on my disciplinary hearing. It was supposed to be the chaired my disciplinary hearing. What can I say? This is what we've got to deal with. This is what we're going to deal with. And this was questioned under oath on the record. It was, I was gobsmacked. He wouldn't have even the grace to hold back.
But despite him saying that, they still found it again in the favour of the company.
They did indeed, and they found me to be an unreliable witness, etc., etc., etc. But they called Jesus a wine bibber. It's quite amazing, but those were the findings, and this was a man that was and is a trustee of the charity Evolve Housing Plus Support, who claims that when they had the judgment against them, he did not see any media reports, he did not look at any newspapers, he was totally unaffected by any media. This story was in the Times. His wife has an online subscription to the Times. This was in the Telegraph. He has an online subscription to the Telegraph. And he was trying to tell us, no, I hadn't seen this, and the court believed him, or decided they believed him. The interesting thing about employment tribunals, they are they're not even courts. They're the lowest kind of rung on the ladder, alongside, I think, um, small claims courts and so forth. So their findings are not even binding on other employment tribunals. And in our journey, we've had to go to the EAT to overturn their judgments in 2 occasions. So I see the judgment, but I'm not impressed by it. It is what it is. I think that the public, when hearing the testimony, and I think more importantly, my story will be told as a movie, which is going to be made in 2027. I think when that movie comes out, I think people will say, wow. And we'll look at some of these judgments and say, really? You couldn't see that something was desperately wrong here? Because we have all the facts, we have all the documentation, and the producers of that movie are very keen to tell just what we can verify on the evidence set before these various tribunals, so that there can be no blowback, no lawsuits or anything. And the truth, I've decided that I'll claim that as being big on truth.
Will you be appealing the latest employment tribunal decision?
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
Will you be appealing the latest employment tribunal decision?
So one more time.
Will you be appealing the latest decision?
Will I be appealing? I'm not minded to. What I am minded to do is give the findings to those agencies that I mentioned before, and say, you guys are lawyers. Because an appeal is based on law, you can't put any new evidence. Have a look at it. If you think that you have got a case in law for an appeal, I'm willing to stand. But I don't feel called to, although I've won once by standing as a litigant in person in the EAT, I don't think I'm qualified to do an appeal on my own. It would have to be one of those agencies looked at this and say, yes, George, we'll go with it. And I'd hand over the bundle to them and see how they get on with it. So that's before the Lord. For me, I don't want to want to be in court again as a litigant in person. It's a lot of work. It is like taking a law degree. The cases you don't have to read, the arguments, and I failed at so many turns. The stuff that I thought I'd understood, and judges are saying, no, that's just not it. But I won on enough points to see this journey through. But in terms of an appeal, it would have to be one of those other agencies saying, yeah, this is worthwhile. There may be human rights issues here. There may be legal issues here. And I would stand and I'd go all the way to the European courts if somebody was taking it up and asked me to do it. And I'd do it not because I like to be in court, but because it's important. It's important that we stand, and having done all to stand, stand.
Thank you, George. I'll let someone else ask questions now.
Thank you very much, Will. I'd like to ask Tony Ruczynski to take over with your questions, please. Thank you.
George, thank you very much for taking the time to share things with us and going into all the detail. Much appreciated. Thanks to Will also. He's taken, we think along the same lines, obviously, because I was going to ask some of those questions, but maybe I can follow up with a few other things. Firstly, just for the benefit of anyone who's listening in, and I know the hearing isn't really about this, but you mentioned the born this way thing, and it's probably fair to say that the majority of the science is very much against any idea that anyone's born this way, if you like, and that environmental factors are in fact at play in most cases, if not all cases. But that aside, I was interested I would be interested to learn. So, given what took place, before all the hearings and just the conversation and everything else like that, in a reasonable world, how do you think all this should have worked out?
Oh, in a reasonable world, there should have been a meeting with myself and that colleague, and it made very clear that this is not the sort of behavior you should be doing to your work colleague. You should not be making racist remarks about the mother of his son, and I'm married to a beautiful Russian woman, so it is personal. I felt like in raising that, I felt like I was standing up for my wife. Yes, I am a man who loves a beautiful white woman, and I'm allowed to. You know, and you're not allowed to say that that's a problem. That is not a thing that you can say. And you're not allowed to shun me because I've answered honestly some questions that you put to me. So, in a reasonable world, there would have been that conversation. She would have been told, um, "This is not this is not appropriate." I would have hoped there would have been an apology. I would have shook hands, and we would have gone back to work. That would be the end of it. But that didn't happen.
Yeah, yeah.
That
I
didn't
only
happen.
ask because
They
I'm
actually
curious.
supported her stance.
Yeah, I ask because I'm curious. At what degree do we accept that different people have different views and all sorts of things in a liberal democracy, and share them with each other when they're conversing in work? And actually, to what degree should we be clogging up the entire system with he said, she said, and I didn't like it?
We shouldn't. I think this is. They have spent tens of thousands of pounds on this. I was a litigant in person because I didn't want to spend tens of thousands of pounds on this. And had I hired lawyers, I think we would have got better outcomes even last week. But it would have cost because it's a no-cost forum. You can't ask for costs from the other side. It would have cost me my house. you know. But they clearly took a stance, and I've got to say one thing. The biggest cost to me for this whole saga is actually the loss of my son that I mentioned. My son hasn't spoken to me in over 4 years. Why? Because when I was, and I can't give you a figure, but when I was offered a lot of money to walk away from this case, and I said no, he thought I was crazy. He's not a Christian. He thought I was crazy, took umbrage, and that's broken our relationship. My prayer is that the Lord, who hears my cry, maybe even uses this testimony to get my son back.
Yeah, well,
And
first of all, George, I'm really sorry to hear that. A man's relationship with his son is very, very important, and any of us who are parents of girls or boys know that full well. So I hope that resolves itself too. I really, really do. And it kind of brings me on to my other query, really, which is, of course, you often find in these sorts of cases that and maybe I can use the word perpetrators, hide behind a shield of massive corporate legal finances. And even when these cases do prove that somebody did or said something wrong, well, there's just no repercussions at all. And some insurance or some local authority or some other big fund pays for the legal fees, and everyone goes on life as normal. What do you think? I mean, how should the system change? What should be changed to make the outcome a little bit more fair, so people think before they go and do this to the next guy in the queue?
I think the solution is very, very simple, particularly for those who do business with government. I think if a company is found to have racially abused or religiously abused or any of the protected characteristics, they should be automatically cut off from government contracts. That would be a powerful message to say to we don't accept this. And the thing about it, and you asked about what could have been done. You see, I believe that no company needs to be in the employment tribunal because of racism or religious harassment. Why? Because there's a statutory defense. And the statutory defense is that we did everything we could to mitigate this. And everything they could to mitigate it would have been to sit the two people down because it's the two employees, whether there be a manager and a foot soldier that have had the problem, that they could sit them down and sort it out. The reason why Evolve Housing Plus Support have spent tens, if not hundreds of thousands of pounds on this case is because they didn't want to do that. They wanted to support an agenda. And whether it costs them at this stage, I think when the movie comes out, and so Oscar-winning director doing it, and I don't know who will be in the cast, I think that that's when the roosters will come home to roost.
Yeah.
Because names will be named, and they won't be able to do anything. And we've seen it in a couple of movies where people have tried to sue film companies. I say, good luck with that, because they got more money than you. You know, if you're going to go into millions of things, good luck with that.
All right, George. And how much of this do you think is the fault of a poor Equalities Act, which lists so many things that often come into conflict? So here you've had your views about lesbian and gay activity as a Christian conflicting, and then you've got the issue of race relations and all sorts of other things coming into the mix as well. And you end up with these conflicting things in the workplace. You believe something which offends somebody else. Well, you know, you're offended because of their beliefs, and the whole thing gets a bit silly. Do you think the Equalities Act is fit for purpose?
Well, let me roll it back. In my case, there was another case similar, very similar to this, of a nursery. I think they were in Shepherd's Bush, where a nursery nurse was asked a similar kind of question, and she won the case. So there's case record that you sort of look at that and said, hands down, this guy's going to win this case. That's why he should have actually just dealt with it. There was no way that they were going to win this, except to say that one ET case does not bind another one, you know, because it's such a low-level court. So that's one thing. I think the most egregious thing in this whole system actually is the role of ACAS. Because what ACAS, I think it's a COT4 form that employers, if you go through, as I have, the employment tribunal case log, you'll see so many cases withdrawn. And what that means is that ACAS has come in and they have negotiated a deal where people get offered more money, lump sum money, than they've ever had in their life, because they're a tea lady, they're a concierge, and somebody says, I'm going to give you £10,000. But you've just got to sign this form that says, we've got no liability, and you're not going to say anything. So they're muzzled straight away. Yeah. And so what happens then, the statistics say that actually this was withdrawn, so it was not a case at all. But the reality is it was a case. And I actually helped about half a dozen people in Evolve who had racial discrimination and other cases against, and they settled. and those will never be seen on the radar. They can't even talk. I can't even talk about specific cases because they've taken the money, signed the form, and so it hides the data. And I made this point clear when the Conservative government did a report on racism and claimed that there was no institutional racism going on in the country. I said, well, that's a joke, because there are 4,000 cases at the ET, most of which were withdrawn. Why? Because people, if you're earning, 20 grand a year as a concierge, and someone said, I'm going to give you £10,000 tax-free, ex gratia payment, no taxes, it's yours. Just sign here, and it all goes away. I was offered, I can tell you, substantially more than that amount, and I said no.
Mm.
And that was their problem. But it's also kicked up a problem for me.
Mm. Mm. All right, George, that's really useful information. My final points, I would just be looking back, is there anything you would have done differently?
Oh, yeah. Lots of, I made so many mistakes.
Not about the original conversation, because that took place.
No.
Once it all kicked off, and is there anything you would have done differently?
I would have condensed my complaint to the main event. I added things there which I couldn't prove, the kind of conspiracy between the managers and the co-worker. But to me, it seemed obvious. But the courts, they want evidence. They want cast iron evidence. I couldn't give that, so I lost on that. And I lost on 7 things that I should not have actually put into the case, and that would have made the reporting of the case much stronger. But I didn't know. This is the first case that I don't go around. I've had brickbacks. I've been a pastor for 30 odd years. People are saying stuff. The reason this was important is because it was an abuse of power in the workplace.
Right, George,
I've had arguments on TV. But this was an abuse of power in the workplace, and with people who have the power to actually destroy your livelihood because of your faith. That's big power.
And that's the thing. And I hope those who are listening learn from your experience, if nothing else. And I hope you find a way of putting this behind you, getting on with life, knowing that you stood your ground and you won your victory, and you made a difference, and that others could benefit from that. Very, very grateful to you, George. Thank you very much, and I'll hand back to Robert now.
Thank you very much, Tony. Can I call on Ian Shelley to take over with questions? Ian, over to you, please.
Thank you. Hello, George. Thank you for I was looking at the website of Evolve, this charity. It all seems very, it's talking about helping young people in London finding accommodation. At the bottom of the page, where you sometimes have sort of affiliates and things, there's 3 logos. 2 of them seem very specifically LGBT, Stonewall Housing and an organization, House Proud, with rainbow colors. So it doesn't seem to be in the general about us, nothing that say it's particularly an LGBT organization, but then it has those particular links. How did you find the culture? Was the culture particularly influenced by the sort of LGBT lobby, or because you mentioned the area manager, or was that just, was it not in general particularly an LGBT focused organization?
Well, I would have to say yes. Again, I have to tell you, I worked at night, so I didn't move around with the day people. 2 people sitting at a desk. However, I remember when there was the Pride March, and this went into my evidence at the ET. There was Pride March coming on, and there was a team meeting, and they'd sent somebody from head office to see what we were going to be able to do for the Pride March. And they had actually printed up T-shirts so that the customers, the residents, could wear them at this Pride March. And thankfully, the representative of the customers, as they call them, was a Muslim guy. And he said, well, actually, I don't think any of us are interested in this. We don't want to do this. And certainly I'm not interested in it because of my faith. And it was a golden moment because they were just put in their place. And they were like, why are you doing this? Why are you getting vulnerable people who are homeless with any number of mental challenges? Why are you coming in and asking them to march for a cause that is not theirs? And they were roundly put in their place. No, we're not interested in it. You know, we're not getting up for this. And that was very telling that they would actually have T-shirts made ready to go on a Pride March. Didn't experience some March for Jesus. I didn't have to see the same thing happen for that, but I did see it. I witnessed it and raised it, and they pushed back and said, "Oh, we do have a carol service that we recommend people to go to, or something like that." But I'd never seen anybody come to promote in the way that Pride March was promoted. And these were vulnerable people. You know, just before I arrived there was a girl there that committed suicide at Gloucester Road Station, living in that place. There are people I would see drug taking that would be left unchallenged. In fact, the first day that I arrived at there, when I've been given the tour of the place and shown the various living accommodation, I was led into one apartment, one studio flat, and there were the scales, the cannabis seeds around the scales, the little pouches that they. So this is a drug dealer, and sure enough, he was. I watched for 2 years while they plied his trade outside the door. As people would drive up in their cars, he'd come down. Nothing was done over a whole 2-year period. I had one case where a young lady is really trying hard to get out of a life of prostitution, fell back on her rent, told her key worker that she was going out to prostitute herself that evening. By the time I got on to shift, she was phoning me up crying. I don't know what happened. I had to move that up the line. I think, how can you allow this to happen to vulnerable people in your care and take money from them? Take money from the council and the government for doing that. It was quite disheartening to see. I could regale you with other stories, but this is not what this meeting is or this commission is about. But but in terms of LGBT, yes, I would say it was clearly in favour. There were those who would say that it was rife throughout the company, but I don't know because I worked at night, so I didn't know people.
It's interesting what you say about the Muslim trustee who pushed back on Pride, because that rather gets to the what our commission's about. Do you think that a Muslim pushing back had an easier time than a Christian against the LGBT contingent in the company?
Well, this was he was the Muslim representative of the residents. I haven't got a point of comparison except with myself. I think if I had raised that, I would have been hounded. I supported him once he raised it in the meeting. And I was just very pleased to hear what he had to say. I would say it's easier for the residents to raise it than for the workers to raise it. Whether it's easier for the Muslims, I don't know, but I was very pleased that he did, and they had to retreat. Nobody from our facility went on a Pride March that year.
Right. Yeah. I say in the disciplinary hearings in the and then again in the tribunal, was it mainly this particular area manager who was gay? Was he really driving it, or was there a general consensus, and were other people also pushing against you as much as he was?
Yes, there was, and that was one of the claims I made with regards to one of the directors. I forget what her title was. Castigating me for making that comparison of homosexuals say they're born like that, and paedophiles say that they're born like that. And as was mentioned earlier, actually, the science, the most people would say that's actually rubbish. But I was able to say, I know one person who thinks that's true, and he happens to be gay. So how bad is it that I've said it? If a gay doctor in Canada, you can go online and see what he has to say, is also saying this. They didn't like that. And they fought against, this guy was prepared to actually support me and fly over from Canada and be in the hearing. But they went to the judge and said, no, we don't want this man to testify, it's not relevant, etc., etc. And this is something that they did time and time again. You'd be surprised perhaps to know that in the tribunal, the young lady involved, she never entered the tribunal. She never was on the witness stand. In last week's tribunal hearing, the former CEO was not there. I tried to get him on the docket. They fought tooth and nail to get him off the docket so he wouldn't have to testify. The independent HR guy that they brought in, I wanted him on the docket so that he would testify. They went to great legal means to get him off. They just didn't want people to be under oath to have to answer the questions that I had to put forward. So this was very, very interesting. Certainly, yes, they had top law firms on this. They threatened me with a lawsuit for mentioning the name of and the judgment against the manager, which went out in a Christian magazine. These people are not easy, as we'd say. They're quite brutal, and I thank God for the protection that He's given to me and my family all the way through it. It's not something that I would recommend all to do unless you've put the full armor of God on as you go in to deal with this. There are fiery darts.
And on that, your remark you mentioned about paedophiles saying that they are born that way. Do you think the objection to what you said was it more that you were sort of undermining that argument that, oh, well, it's innate, we can't help it, it's natural, it's not a choice or nurture, it's inevitable? Or was it maybe the hint that of the overlap or the link between homosexuality and paedophilia? Do you think it was the latter or just the former?
I think it was the latter that caused their consternation. And I can see why. in that both paedophilia and homosexuality are sexual predilections. They're to do with sex. You can't get away from it. Whatever your argument, they are to do with sex. And they were uncomfortable with gay and paedophile being in the same sentence, you know. And it's like, I don't, you know, it's the truth. They're to do with sex. How they came about, I don't know. You want to say you were born like it? I don't really buy that, but I've got a gay doctor who buys that paedophiles are born like that. So if he is right, and you're right that gays are born like that, then you have something in common. You were born like that.
It's an area where, unfortunately, academics fear to tread now. But if you go back to the 1980s, when there was a bit more freedom in university research, we see that I think the Family Research Institute in America looked at 19 studies and found that 25 to 40% of child molesters were homosexuals, compared to a population of 2-3%. So there's a very significant overlap when people last looked at it. But wouldn't it be nice if people could do objective, unbiased research now?
Yes.
We could have some evidence-based research on this. Yes.
I think there will, and I think there will be research, particularly when our movie comes out, which is called "You Can't Say That," and it focuses on that comment, that the fact that you can't say it.
Can I just ask finally, the language that was used? What was the predominant language? Was it really just we're defending customers who might search you online? Was it you're contravening the principles of diversity, inclusion, equity, which we think a company or body should follow? Was it you were particularly discriminating against someone, or was it just our LGBT worldview is above critique and shouldn't be challenged? I mean, I'm putting forward, there may be other things. I'm putting forward 4 different attitudes. Did you discern those, particularly in what was coming at you?
Well, I discerned that they were trying and failing to be very process driven. We've ticked every box. We've got an investigator and so, but it all unraveled with the bias of the investigator. The one thing that they did bang on about was this comment that had gays and paedophiles in the same sentence. That, as was identified by one of my advisors from one of the institutions I mentioned, that was what sent the balloon up. That's what made them see red. And I think it's for the reasons that you indicated, that they would not like to see any link, even if you're saying that gays support West Ham United and so do paedophiles. They would not anything that put them in the same sentence or paragraph.
Thank you, George. Good.
Thank you very much, Ian. Just before we proceed, can I ask that while this discussion can take many tangents in terms of scientific questions regarding sexual orientation, because we're pressed by time and we need to keep to the remit of what this commission of inquiry is about, if we can try our best not to venture into the territory of, scientific studies, as interesting as that might be. Could I ask, thank you, Ian, for your questions. Can I ask Peter Williams? Peter, would you like to take over with your questions to George? Thank you.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you, George, for attending this meeting. I'm very sorry, by the way, to hear about the situation with your son, and I will pray that that is resolved as amicably, as happily as humanly possible, as soon as possible. On another note, I look forward to Denzel Washington playing you in this film. That should be
a good idea.
That should be quite fun. Are you on the
Well,
Isle of Man
his father
Highway?
was a minister.
He was
There
indeed.
yeah.
That's right. Are you on the Isle of Man?
Yes, I am on the Isle of Man.
Is it a nice day?
Yes.
Though I love the Isle of Man. It's a beautiful place.
Yes, and whenever you want to come over, just let us know. We've got a spare room, and we
Excellent.
have palm trees.
Yeah, it's a wonderful place. I should just note for the recording as well, I hadn't noted until you mentioned the Oxford Union debate that we were on the same side on that debate. I appeared next to you. I think you were third speaker and I was second speaker. I haven't seen you since, however, so I think it's still appropriate for me to field your questions here, but I thought that would be worth just noting for the sake of the recording. I'm going to ask some devil's advocate questions, if I may. I'm trying to look at things from the point of view of the area manager. I'm trying to charitably put myself in his shoes. And therefore, I want to ask you questions on the basis of what he put forward in his witness statement. So if we go to paragraph 10 of that, one of the things that's reported is that the colleague that you had the argument with, or the discussion, whatever we want to call it, said that on the 1st of February 2019, she had rushed into work in need of the lavatory and had said hi to everyone very quickly, but you had confronted her, accused her of saying hi to another colleague and not to you, and had said, "I demand respect from you." Would you corroborate that story, or is that an exaggeration? Is that...
Well, there was only two colleagues there to say good morning to. So it wasn't like you came into a room, waved good morning to a whole room of people. It was very clear that she was not speaking to me deliberately. And it doesn't come out in that testimony. You have to understand the context. You're talking about she's coming to take over, and there are two night concierges sitting at a desk. You go up to one and say good morning. You don't go up to the other.
So she didn't make a general hello. This was very deliberately to one and shunning you, is the way you would read that situation.
And this was the nature of this. And I said, and yes, I do demand respect. I just do demand not to be disrespected. So, but the context of that needs to be understood.
Because that statement on its own would appear, as it were, a passive-aggressive move from you that would, as it were, exacerbate whatever tensions had come out from that previous conversation, as opposed to being something that would necessarily heal that situation. So there are elements of this in which I want to kind of, again, playing devil's advocate, say, may it be that the way that you had handled that situation afterwards led to her not wanting to talk to you more because of not just the distaste that she had after the conversation that you had in retrospect, but also having looked you up and all that sort of thing, but also because you had confronted her directly. And this seems to be a woman who is very sensitive, shall we say, very fragile, maybe vulnerable, that might not have been helpful.
You don't know the woman. She is 6 foot tall, 13, 14 stone, a big black woman, wears army fatigues, quite a formidable presence. So it's nice to get that impression, even in the documentation, how they coined her name to make you perhaps think that that's who we're dealing with.
Right.
We're dealing with somebody who, the first time I met them, they had contact lenses that made their eyes red, kind of like a demonic looking bit, and was going off to the March of the Dead up in South America, the Day of the Dead.
Yeah.
So this was no, not the woman that you've described to me.
Okay. That's the characterization that the area manager had given, so I wanted to probe that. If we move to paragraph 31 in his witness statement, he had said that this woman had Googled you, as we all do. We often, I have to say, I am prone myself to, and certainly would defend the idea of when you meet someone or before you meet someone, doing an online search and just getting a sense of the person, their background, as preparation for meeting them, or maybe after having met them, looking them up rather more. She said that she had done that about you. And this was between the initial conversation that you had with her in January 2019 and seeing you again on the 1st of February when that you had the encounter that I just recounted. And he said that given these factors, this is paragraph 31, I thought that it would be sensible for me to conduct an online search in order to A, see what type of things this person might have seen, and B, to give context as to what you had told him about your public and media presence. Do you think that was an unreasonable thing for him to have done it?
Not necessarily unreasonable. I think what was unreasonable was for him then to bring all that into the investigation meeting with me. If he's, I want to know what she knew. I want to know, but to hold that against me as it appeared to me in that meeting was totally inappropriate in my view. And we know that people Google people, and this actually is the point. If we're not safe to be ourselves, and you're going to Google and find, well, this guy did an alpha course, ran an alpha course at his local church. Does the balloon go up there? This guy, is a lay preacher in their church. That cannot be allowed to impact on one's work. That's why it's a protected characteristic, and he should have known that. He should have known that right from the start. Okay, people look at my online presence all the time, and you won't find anything that's criminal. You won't find yet in terms of what happens, if our faith finally gets criminalized, but you'll find a whole lot of Christian stuff. And if you bring that into the workplace, then you've discriminated. And if he was doing background, park that, okay, I know what we're talking about now, but to bring it as a factor in his investigation at the forefront, it's totally wrong. And that's what the judge found. And to lie and say you got permission to do so is what I allege, based on the evidence that I've got from the ICO, is, even more outrageous. And so the ICO actually said that to do that online search within the capacity of the investigation, he should have actually asked for my permission.
Interesting. Thank you very much for that. I'll ask one more devil's advocate question, then a broad question. I don't think, just to editorialize first, that the issue with your comments with regards to homosexuality and paedophilia had anything to do with a scientific debate. Okay, I think we can put that to one side. I think the problem that this person probably had was the perception that you had conflated the two, that rather than making an empirical claim, you were, I think she thought you were making a comparison as if the two are the same thing. One being a form of abuse, direct abuse, the other being thought of generally as a sexuality. So rather than refuting, what you were doing is refuting an argument with analogy. What she thought you were doing was, as I say, comparing the two, conflating the two. It's quite an inflammatory comparison to make. Would you accept that? And do you think that would be that was part of the reason why she came to the attitude that she had consequently?
Well, it's inflammatory, I think, if I knew, which I didn't, that she was a lesbian and that she was gay, I can see how it would have been inflammatory.
Do you not think it would be inflammatory for most people? I mean, I would find that somewhat inflammatory if someone compared the two as if they were the same thing.
Well, no, I didn't compare them as if they were the same thing. I was saying this argument that you're making.
No, I get the argument, but I think the nature of the analogy you made led her to think you were making that. It's a flawed perception, but that's the perception she had, and the danger when we do this sort of thing is that, or we use that kind of analogy, might be that people will make that kind of assumption, even if it's an irrational one.
Yeah, there's all, the old saying that an assumption makes an ass of you and me. And what I would say to that is that should have been unpacked, in that calm room, with the two of us. We were never actually brought together. And that point made, and I would have said, was never my intention. Forgive me for that. That was never my intention. And I didn't, and I would have also said, I didn't know that you were gay. No, you didn't have the banner. You weren't wearing gay pride things. So had I known that you were a lesbian, I think I would have probably not even engaged in the same way. But I thought I was talking to a workmate, not a close workmate, somebody I had good relationship, and you're asking me a question. And it's a friendly conversation. But I do stand by, and I've said it, if you're going to use this innate argument, you're not the only show in town that uses this innate argument. And basically it is not one that you would want to carry if somebody else came. There are murderers who say that they are born like that. It's just not an argument, and that's.
But just to clarify, though, you were not saying that homosexuality and paedophilia are the same sort of thing.
No, I've not said that ever.
I'm just aware of time.
And actually,
I'll just leave that point there. Just go to one final point, which is which is more of a general question. Paragraph 59 in the area manager's witness statement. He says that during his meeting with you, he had put to you whether this link was seen as homophobic by the LGBT plus at that point community, and you had neither agreed nor disagreed. Now, the question just I have to that is, it seems to me in discrimination, more generally when we talk about discrimination, ever since the Stephen Lawrence report, I should say, the discrimination is often interpreted as anything which is perceived by another person to be discriminatory, rather than anything which has the intentionality of being discriminatory, or the or has an objective content or objective content as opposed to a subjective content that is so. Do you think that question reflects that? Because it seems to me that if that is the case, then discrimination against Christians, potentially, would very easily come about by people's false perception that anything that would be a traditional Christian belief about sexuality, that therefore had an implication about LGBTQ plus, etc., beliefs or practices, would be seen as inherently discriminatory. And I think that's a fundamental problem with the discussion. So just wanted to see what you thought about that. Do you think that was an element to that question?
I remember when we were campaigning against the religious hatred bill many years ago. And the reason for that was actually there was a kind of strange bedfellows on that, is that this subjectivity actually puts a lot of power to whoever you're speaking to. Because if they really feel that, who am I to say that they don't really feel that? If I say the sun is shining and they receive that as some kind of offense to their belief in the sun god or whatever, it's just becomes a mess. And the one judge says, only the devil knows and God knows the thoughts of man. So whether it would be offensive to, if I was talking to James Cantor, the gay doctor from Canada, and said this, he would not be offended at all. He would not. He would maybe even say, "Hey, and George, here's my research that I've done on this." Speak to somebody else, they may be offended. So when you ask me a question about all of the LGBT Q community, I'm not the one to answer that. When I read what's his name? He wrote a book, The Madness of the Crowd, written by
Douglas Murray.
Yeah, who's gay. I read and I think, well, he's a gay guy that I could get on with real well because he's talking sense. So I couldn't answer for the LGBTQ community. I can see how some might and some, but I can't speak for the whole community. That's why I could say neither here nor there. As a member of the Christian community, I can speak more freely on matters relating to the Christian community. But particularly, as I say, having seen that there was a leading doctor that actually goes further than I even believe, because I don't believe that they're born that way, either group, but I do believe that both groups do say that they are born that way, if that makes sense.
Sure. Just to end the point then, and this will be my last question, by analogy, do you think that discrimination against Christians should be determined by how Christians perceive the actions of others, or whether there should be an objective content that is discriminatory to those people's actions that then has a negative effect on Christians?
I think that when there is, when it can be objectively said that there's been discrimination, I think we're in a much stronger place. And the reason I went forward with my case is because objectively, and it's really quite clear from the judge that he was not really on my side. But you got to look at the facts. That stuff just shouldn't have happened. You know,
Yeah.
He was so warm to the other side. He said that my comment could even have been taken as harassment itself. Well, it never was, so you're assuming. But just looking at what happened, that should not happen. And the main takeaway from my case is that no Christian should be disciplined and within their disciplinary hearing have their online activities outside the workplace years ago brought into that conversation. Not a one. Not a one. That is discrimination, and that's what was upheld. And that's objective. That's, was it? Clearly it was. It's not just my opinion. Not that I'm feeling, frail and sensitive and, oops, you did that. You clearly were out of order. And I think when we come from that position, we actually make a stronger case, or else we could, everybody gets offended one way or another, and we could be in and out of court and arguing all the time. It's not the first time that somebody has said so, but I am deeply concerned about people in the position of power to actually end other people's livelihoods being motivated by animus against our faith. And that's why I stood up.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Peter. I have a few further questions, if I may, George. If I heard you correctly, you said that you were offered a lot of money to stop the case. Who exactly offered you that money?
Well, the other side, it happens all the time. It happens all the time.
Sure.
And, we had documentation, and I took it to my family. And, because my family is supporting me, and just said that I can't do this. I've got to be able to speak about this. I cannot take this. I would have been better off actually not saying a word to my family, but that's not the way I relate to my family, and it's cost me.
Yes. Now, I think there were 2 meetings between yourself and the area manager when he did his investigation. Is that right?
There was one meeting prior to the actual disciplinary inquiry meeting. And the first meeting I was accompanied by a colleague. And at that meeting, he said, I made the point that you need to speak to my other colleagues on the night shift who can testify to the behavior of this woman. He said, I'll do that, I'll call them and so forth. Then some days passed, I don't know whether it's weeks, and then there was the meeting that I had with him and the HR.
Following one of these grievance hearings with the area manager, you were given guidance, I understand, about the sharing of your personal views and also the expectations the company, the charity had about your online presence. Can you tell us what constituted this guidance exactly?
I can't remember the guidance. Basically, that it would have been about this whole question of we have a diverse cohort of customers, and you need to be sensitive, and so, all of which I was anyway. No, I was not going into work. I did actually take my Bible to work from, but in the middle of the night to read a Bible, but I was not proselytizing. So all of this, my comments, just like, this is how I've been behaving anyway, But
Did
I
they
made the
ever-
point that if somebody asks me a question, it is a matter of my faith that I need to have an answer.
Did they ever
That's-
suggest you that, or make any point about the material that existed online about you, that which you had control over, for that to be removed? Did they hint at that
No,
in any
no, I
way?
don't think there's no. They didn't say that.
Right.
As far as
But
I
they
can
weren't
remember.
they weren't saying to you that you couldn't speak. Could you say anything in the future, as far as that guidance was concerned? Could you say anything in the future online about these matters deemed to be controversial, or were they just saying, the onus is on you to be responsible for your future speech online? What exactly
See,
was the instruction?
I cannot remember the full nature of that guidance, to be frank with you. It's like 5 years ago. But they were in a bit of a cleft stick in that I was already a public person, already doing TV interviews, maybe once a month for the BBC, as a Christian apologist. So I think they were smart enough to know that they couldn't say, no, I can't do that anymore. You don't get a job as a concierge and lose your rights to free speech. I think what we found was they were now very uncomfortable with having me as their employee and wanted to get rid of me, and were willing to pay a lot of money. The money I was offered, by the way, was that I take the money and leave. They wasn't just take the money and and leave with a
Yes.
good reference.
Yes. My other question is about your fellow support worker with whom there was this conflict. She petitioned to have you fired. She petitioned the senior people in the charity. As far as you are aware, if you are aware of this, how exactly did she do this, and how did the organization respond to her petition?
Well, we both had investigations against us. So she was investigated, I was investigated, and at the end of the day, they crossed. They said, it was like a score draw. No, neither have got anything to answer. She was later continued misbehaving, and was later paid off by the company. I found that out by their own mistake, and they had to admit this in the hearing, that they paid her off to leave the company because So she probably can't really speak on what she was doing behind the scenes or so forth, because they paid her off. They paid off a
I see.
racist and a religious harasser.
Yes, I have a question about the suspension risk assessment that was made of you, which we haven't discussed. It does come up in the documentation. So following the Employment Tribunal's award of damages to you, which you cited earlier, there was a suspension risk assessment made about you because they initially suspended you and then eventually they dismissed you, which you said. Can you just tell us a little more about what that risk assessment was and your own assessment of the assessment?
Can I ask for just a moment, please?
You can, yes, we can
Yeah.
pause it, no problem.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
You were asking about the risk assessment.
Correct. And if you can just give us, I mean, there's a lot to it. I do appreciate that. If you can just give us a summary of what that risk assessment involved and how you understand that risk assessment, how, you know, your own assessment of the assessment itself. Could you tell us about that, please?
Well, the risk assessment was 2 sheets of paper, which outlined an allegation against me, which was the subject of my suspension and subsequent dismissal. The purpose of the risk assessment, in my understanding, was to assess whether suspension would be appropriate. And there were a number of boxes, a column that says hazard, and another box that says detail, and then another column that said highly unlikely, likely, highly unlikely, likely, highly likely. So I think 3 columns or maybe 4. I don't have it in front. But the idea of that risk assessment, and I've had to deal with risk assessment myself. I used to own a private school, so we're used to this. All that was on this risk assessment was crosses in boxes. There's no detail. There's nothing that any third party could look at and say, oh, so that's why you think this is highly likely or this is highly unlikely. And to me, I just thought it was a joke, and I still think it's a joke. And in fact, I was able to prove last week, or have the former HR manager agree last week, that the box about my mental health, my well-being, which is highly unlikely that there's any risk, could not possibly be true. Because I had been bullied, harassed, I'd been found to have been bullied and harassed. And the evidence available to her at that time showed that if you're bullied at work, it has mental health and well-being consequences. So, and also, if you're suspended, that also has consequences in your well-being and mental health. So putting the two together meant you couldn't possibly have come to the conclusion that it's highly unlikely that a person who's been racially abused, who has been religiously harassed, and is now being suspended, is highly unlikely to have any anxiety, any mental health, well-being issues if they're suspended. And that was just one example of the fact that there had been no detail, and really it was perfunctory piece of, I won't even call it work, that they presented.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. I just have a few brief questions before I close. Following your suspension, which was in October 2020, up to the point of your dismissal, which I understand was in February of 2021, did they have you on full pay during that period?
Oh yes, full pay. Yes, I was on full pay. Very meticulous in trying to tick all the normal boxes for suspension, and including the risk assessment, which was literally a tick box exercise with no detail, just, in my view, to say we did a risk assessment, but I don't think they did.
Now, you made it very clear that when the case was first heard in the employment tribunal, you won on the counts of racial discrimination that they committed against you and religious discrimination, and there were a few other strands which you didn't win on in that initial hearing.
Robert, can I just interrupt you there? That you were breaking up quite badly, so you'll need to repeat that question, maybe just a bit more slowly, if you.
Sure. You made it very clear, George, that when you first brought your case to the employment tribunal a few years ago, that you won the case on the grounds that the organisation had committed racial discrimination against you and religious discrimination against you. There were some other strands of your case that you didn't win. But can I just fast forward that to the case that you brought a few days ago to the employment tribunal? What was it exactly that you brought to the tribunal? What strands of your case did you bring this week? And what was it that you didn't actually achieve that you wanted to achieve?
Okay. When the case was announced and put online, in June, there were headline news in various newspapers, and in the Telegraph in particular, there was a comment from Evolve Housing Plus Support. And that comment started off, "We are pleased to have succeeded and most of," I'm paraphrasing, I think the Commission has the exact quote there, but they started off saying how pleased they were that they basically had succeeded on the majority of the claim, and on a few discrete points they'd lost. And I thought, whoa, now that's a bit of a spin. Technically, out of 10, I think, points that I raised, 7 were discounted. But the main event was racism and religious discrimination. And as of that time, the judgment had racism and religious discrimination as points that I'd succeeded on, to the point that I was actually awarded financial compensation. So to be able to portray a case where you're having to pay financial compensation and obviously spend a whole lot of legal costs as a victory just seemed to me, why are they doing that? Again, having spoken to a legal friend, they said, well, like, that's, you could probably sue again or add to your remedy claim exemplary and aggravated damages, because this, what they're saying in the public domain, just doesn't really reflect the reality, and that's harmful and hurtful to you. The reality is that they're going to have to pay you money for harming you, and that doesn't come across in their statement. So I went up a rabbit hole which turned out to be erroneous, based on a misconception of the law, and that's what was found in the judgment, concerning aggravated and exemplary damages for that comment. And part of that rabbit hole was that there are two legal tests for such a claim to be able to go forward. One is that you're dealing with a quasi or a governmental or public service body, and the other one is that the other side would have gained financially out of that comment more than they would have had to, they would have gained from the case itself. I couldn't persuade the judge on the first one, so I had to get evidence that the second one, that they would actually benefit from that comment in a financial way. And the way that I saw they could benefit was if they told that story publicly, then their funders would not step away from them. And that would be a financial benefit to them. To gather that evidence, I wrote to the councillors in the areas where they operated and asked them the question, what do you think about this comment? Does it, tell you what happened? They said that this was gross misconduct. I argued that no, this was a protected act because I was doing it in service of my remedy hearing that was to happen on October 9th. That case went to tribunal, and the tribunal found in their favour that it was an act of gross misconduct. I made it very clear that this was action that I would have never have taken had I not been pursuing aggravated and exemplary damages. And in fact, I tried very hard not to take that step. And had I wanted to do such a thing, I wouldn't have needed the remedy hearing to do it. I'd have just done it, and I could have just done it in June or July or August. No, but my first letters went out in late September as the hearing was approaching. I was unable to convince the ET last week of that, so they found in favour of the Evolve Housing Plus support.
Other than the communication you had with the councillors, which you've just cited, had you also communicated your initial award to some friends in an email, and there were objections made about your emails that you sent to friends about you having won the case.
Yes, as you can imagine, if you were there, and Linda Rose, who's chairman, I think, of Voice for Justice, was there. There were lots of people who were interested in the case, who actually turned up in the court and wanted to know what had happened. Let us know how it turns out. So I put a release together and sent it out to my friends. And one way or another, it would appear that this got into the hands of journalists. We're not absolutely sure how, but I made no secret of the fact that when we had gotten the result, I let people know that we'd gotten the result. And I have friends who have websites, who have blogs, who are, I have one friend who's a member of the NUJ, who I know wrote about the outcome, and it then ended up being national news. This created a lot of displeasure with the CEO of Evolve Housing Plus Support, and I argued that it was because of that I was actually suspended. And that act of sending out was a part of my own free speech. There's nothing to stop me telling people what has happened to me. And actually, there's still nothing that stops me because I didn't take the money. I didn't take the money and sign the form. So that allows me even to be speaking to the commission today, let alone doing a movie with whoever might be playing me in that role. Because if I'd taken the money, I would have been gagged.
Yes, thank you. I just have one last question. Can you tell us, you've been fighting over about 5 years, you say, what has been the personal impact on you and perhaps on your wider family?
Well, as I say, the biggest impact is my son, who's actually was what led to the comment about your black guy likes white women, because they'd seen a picture of my son who's mixed race, has not spoken to me in coming on 5 years. He's never seen his brother who's about to turn 4 in March. Never seen him. And my prayer is that it would be a complete closure for this if my son were to basically come home, just give me a call and say, yeah, no, it's over, I understand, Dad. I love my son. I expect most of you, all of you love your children. I'm no different. So I'm like the father in the prodigal son. My arms are outstretched, waiting for him to come. That's been the biggest cost. Yes, there's been a roller coaster of emotions, and it's hard doing that. But you kind of you get through that, and you know when you're going into battles, you're going to take a blow, and it's going to be painful, and so I'm done with that. There was great catharsis. You asked me about what did I achieve in that second case. I achieved the ability to actually speak to the trustees, to the HR manager, which I would have never have had a chance to do, and ask some questions. And as I said to that tribunal, that was catharsis for me. I'm able to move on. I'm here today because it's a part of the moving on. The icing on the cake, the full stop, would be my son Nicky sitting at my table here on the Isle of Man, and maybe we go out for a round of golf afterwards. that would be complete. And I know God can do it. I'm expectant. The hearts of the fathers will turn to the sons, and hearts of the sons to the fathers, is how the Old Testament closes. That's how important this is to God. So I am expectant that He will do that,
Thank you.
And the rest will be to His glory.
Thank you, George. Are there any other questions from the commissioners? No. Perhaps just in closing, can I ask you a broader question, which I'm sure you've thought about? What's your assessment, and please keep this brief if possible, what's your assessment of freedom of speech in the United Kingdom for Christians who manifest their faith in a public capacity?
I do think it's under threat. I don't think it's been totally locked down. It will remain under threat if we don't stand up to the abuses. I am free to say what I've said, but there will be consequences, as I suffered consequences. Those consequences were illegal. So it's up to us to say, this is not right. And that takes courage, probably more courage than I have. But it does take courage. It does take Christians to stand. And if we don't stand, then we will fall. Because de facto, people will think, oh, we can do that to Christians. I think by the time this matter is fully over, and I think it will be over with the publication of the movie, there will be companies who will say, let's not do this, because we might just have a movie made about us or a documentary about us. And also there will be, even from this testimony, others will say, yeah, I'm going to do what George Hargreaves did. I'm going to stand up. And the more of us that stand, the greater the freedom we'll have to do what we must do, which is preach the gospel. This is what this is all about. This is about, sinners being saved, and we are saved by that same grace. My conversation about homosexuality was not a conversation of hate. It was not a conversation of condemnation. It was a conversation that pointed to John 9 and said, look, even if that's your feeling, we have a God who can deal with that, a God who loves you and a God who saves.
Thank you. Are there any other closing points? I think we've covered a lot of ground, George. Are there any other closing points that you feel you need to say before this is brought to an end?
I would say that anybody who is minded to stand as a litigant in person, I would say try and get as much free legal advice from wherever you can to help you. I would say in your church, there must be a lawyer that can just read through any letter that you might send out, because I got bashed for sending out an email that was intemperate. And it was, and I admitted that. It came at a time when I was under great pressure and really just wanted it to stop, because I did get to that point. I pray that somebody would take up the idea of a training program for Christians so that they can stand as litigants in person, because there's a lot of this happening, and we cannot just rely on 2 or 3 organizations. This case would have never have come to light had it not been that I was a litigant in person. And we do need training to get better results. And the more that we do that will allow those who would harass us to know it's just not worth it. It's just not worth it, because if they do, they are trained for this particular warfare. And it's a spiritual warfare, and we need to be trained.
Thank you. I'd like to thank you for giving your time today, Reverend Dr. George Hargreaves, and I'd also like to thank the commissioners for constituting this panel and raising all the questions, and also the Commission Secretary. Thank you very much.